from Illinois seek recognition.
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 57, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-559, offered by Mrs. Ramirez of Illinois.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1316, the gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Ramirez, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Illinois.
Madam Chair, I rise in support of my amendment to H.R. 8771. Today, in a few hours, I'll be launching my new Global Migration Caucus. So, while I will stand with colleagues to affirm that there are those of us in Congress who want to be an effective ally to global efforts to create a safer, more equitable world where people can build the life they want and deserve at home, today, my Republican colleagues, however, seek to withdraw our participation in coordinated global efforts, eliminate critical support for migration management, and fuel the crisis of displacement they claim they so desperately want to address. We must not let the recklessness and the dangerous efforts go unchallenged. My amendment, it will strike the harmful, hateful language of the underlying bill that prohibits the support of safe and humane migration management efforts around the world. As Vice-Ranking Member of the Homeland Security Committee, I hear my colleagues talk about what is happening at the border, especially at the southern border. But they ignore questions about why we are seeing a humanitarian crisis at the border. They don't want to talk about the root cause of migration, like violence, democratic backsliding, economic exclusion, climate change, some of these crises that are driving families from their home in search of safety and stability, much like what happened to our own ancestors, maybe in the early 1900s or the 50s. Everything I have witnessed throughout my official trips and conversations with families, governments, and civil society points to this truth. Our country's safety is fundamentally connected to the stability, to the security, and the sustainability people experience or do not experience across the globe. I've heard a mother talk with desperation about the sexual violence and trauma that her 12-year-old endured while crossing the Darien. I heard stories of threats of violence and cartel intimidation that drove a mother to send her sons on a harrowing journey through dangerous migration routes. For so many people around the world, the choice is flee or die. Again, it's no surprise to me that the party of reactionary, isolationist, fear-based, xenophobic politics doesn't understand the ideal of cooperation and prevention. Both cooperation and prevention require forethought, working across differences, embracing possibilities, and a commitment to inclusion, none of which are reflected in H.R. 8771. An example, the bill specifically bans funding for the safe mobility offices, which have been a cost-effective, let me say again, cost-effective part of the U.S. government strategy to reduce irregular migration within the Western Hemisphere. So, to my Republican colleagues, which one is it? Do you want less irregular migration? Or do you want to slash funding to address the conditions that drive displacement around the world and ban funding for programs to increase access to lawful humanitarian pathways to the United States and other countries? Madam Chair, this amendment is necessary. This amendment will address the issues, and I hope that my colleagues will, maybe in some cases, for the first time this Congress, do that common sense thing. Address the issues that they care so much about, they say. And in fact, support migration management, support countries that need resources so that they do not have to come through our southern border. I reserve the rest of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I rise to claim opposition to time in opposition to this amendment.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. A couple things. First, the reason for the situation in the southern border can be explained by just two words: Joe Biden. That is That is who has created the crisis in the southern border. Now, this amendment attempts to strike Section 7045F. By the way, much of this is already existing in law. But it's really basically saying, this amendment, is that, well, we don't have an issue in the southern border. There's no problem with the southern border. We got to realize that close to 10 million people have crossed unlawfully into the United States under this president. That's roughly the population of the entire state of Michigan, for God's sake. And this bill attempts to do what we can, despite the President of the United States, to stop this crisis that has been created by Mr. Joe Biden. See, the bill prohibits outright funding for programs that push migrants towards the United States unlawfully, either by giving them cash cards or giving them information about future stops, where to go, connecting them with lawyers and giving them even coaching them to answer the questions falsely, while claiming asylum. How can anybody support that? This is a country that believes in the rule of law. This amendment also, if that were not enough, proposes to strike the prohibition on funding to the safe mobility offices and the Welcome Corps, unless authorized. That's what the bill that's what the language in the bill does. If that's something you support, authorize it, for God's sake. These are gimmicks which spend tens of millions of taxpayer dollars to circumvent U.S. law, for God's sake. In the case of the Welcome Corps, this is in essence like a matchmaking entity, like Match.com for folks trying to get here illegally, to the United States illegally. It recruits in the United States so-called sponsors to sponsor these individuals, even though they have no connections other than now this kind of match system. And by doing so, the Biden administration frankly has made the situation even worse. For God's sakes, the administration is now even trying to get universities involved. This is coming out of our foreign affairs budget, intended to support our national security. Again, safe mobility centers are operating overseas in places like Ecuador and Colombia, facilitating a fast track of tens of thousands of people to use a mobile app to obtain authorization to then literally show up on the southern border that is wide open. Well, let me restate that. That is controlled absolutely by the Mexican narco cartels. And that's how these folks are coming into the United States. All of this is to facilitate the cartels, to help market this illegal cartel business. So I know some people might say, well, they're going to come anyways, or another way if we don't do this. But advertising and using taxpayer money to become the advertising source, the marketing for folks to come into the United States unlawfully is frankly something that is totally unacceptable. If these programs that the gentlewoman wants to fund are so good, and then bring them up in front of Congress, have them authorized, they would get shot down dramatically because everybody can see what this is. This is using taxpayer money to circumvent the law, which hurts not only our national security efforts and our national security interests, but it also hurts the folks who have been waiting years to try to come legally into the United States. I could not urge our colleagues in a more forceful way to strongly oppose this amendment, and I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman is recognized.
Madam Chair, may I inquire how much time is left on both sides?
1 minute. The
Madam Chair,
gentleman from Florida has 30 seconds remaining.
Madam Chair, I'm prepared to close.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
I find it really ironic and hypocritical. One moment you say, close the borders, don't let people in, and if they want to come, let them come the legal way. And then we create programs, one, to invest in communities outside of the U.S. so that they don't have to come to the southern border. They don't have to do that dangerous journey. We create programs of safe mobility so that they can stay in places like Colombia and other places like Ecuador or España in the future. And then you say not that either. The reality is this is not about President Biden. This is that you want to create crisis and chaos and fear-mongering at all costs, even if one moment you say this and then the other moment you say that, because you have no intention in addressing issues of immigration or border. You want to create chaos because it's the only way you win. My amendment will allow us to address the root causes of migration, to ensure that people can stay in their home countries, and then you won't see them at the southern border. To me, that's a solution, and it is why I urge my colleagues to vote yes.
Members to refrain from addressing other members and address the chair. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Okay. Madam Chair, can I ask how much time I have left?
30 seconds.
Madam Chair, I would like to yield the remaining part of my time to my colleague, who I think will explain why he is also as opposed as I am to this amendment. So I would like to give him as much time as we have left.
The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition to this amendment. I'll take this brief time. Listen to the Orwellian language that we heard from the other side here in regards to irregular migration. What this is laundering that's going on. This is laundering via the Welcome Corps, the Safe Mobility Office. The other thing that we heard was civility. How could this possibly be civil? Is it civil to have human trafficking on an epic scale? Is it civil to have cartels that are brutalizing people, especially women, raped, murdered, coming through the southern border, and the fentanyl crisis that is the number one killer of young people in America? I yield back.